The bottle of 1982 Chateau Petrus sat on the center of the mahogany conference table like a hostage. It was worth $5,000, but my husband looked at it with more affection than he had shown me in 2 decades. He tapped his gold fountain pen against the dark glass. "Make sure you write this down correctly, James," Robert Johnson said. His voice echoed in the sterile office. "The wine cellar and all contents therein remain the sole property of Mr. Johnson." James Wilson, our family lawyer for 15 years, shifted uncomfortably in his leather chair. He did not look at me. He looked at the paperwork. "Patricia," James said softly, "you understand what you are signing. This collection is valued at over $2 million. You are entitled to half." I looked at Robert. He was wearing the Italian silk suit I had picked out for him last Christmas. He looked successfully divorced already, relaxed, triumphant. "She does not want it." Robert laughed. It was a sharp sound that used to make me flinch. "What would she do with a vertical flight of Petrus? Use it for cooking sauce." He turned to me, his eyes cold and flat. "Let us be honest, Patricia. You wouldn't know a Bordeaux from a box wine if the label didn't tell you. This collection requires a sophisticated palate. It requires heritage." The insult landed exactly where he intended. It hit the soft spot of my insecurity, the part of me that always felt like the scholarship student from the wrong side of Chicago, trying to fit into his world of Connecticut trust funds. He was rewriting history. He forgot who had spent weekends scouring estate sales in dusty basements. He forgot who had cataloged every bottle. He forgot that while he just wrote the checks, I was the one who curated the investment. But I did not argue. Arguments with Robert were like wrestling a pig in mud. "You both get dirty, but the pig likes it. I just want it over," I said. My voice was steady. Robert smirked. "See, James, she is being reasonable for once." I reached for the pen. It was heavy in my hand. I signed Patricia Green on the line, leaving the name Johnson behind forever. "One condition," I said. Robert raised an eyebrow. He was already checking his watch, likely calculating how soon he could meet Ashley. "I need 24 hours to move my personal effects. I will be out by tomorrow evening." Robert sighed dramatically. "Fine. But do not touch the inventory. I am hosting a tasting tomorrow night." James Wilson looked up surprised. "Tomorrow?" "Yes." Robert stood up, buttoning his jacket. "A celebration. Ashley has never tried a proper Petrus. I want everything perfect. The investors will be there too. We are closing the merger." He looked at me one last time. "Try not to leave a mess, Patricia. The cleaning crew comes at 5. He walked out without a backward glance. The heavy oak door clicked shut. I sat there for a moment. The silence in the room was heavy. James looked at me. "Patricia, you just gave him everything." "Not everything." I stood up and smoothed my skirt. I kept my self-respect. But as I walked to the elevator, a cold anger began to bloom in my chest. It wasn't the money. It was the arrogance, the absolute certainty that I was nothing more than a temporary inconvenience he had finally discarded. He thought I didn't know wine. He thought I was just the help who organized his life. I took an Uber back to the estate. The iron gates swung open for me, perhaps for the last time. The house was silent. I walked past the living room where we had hosted senators and CEOs. I walked past the kitchen where I had cooked 10,000 meals. I went straight to the basement. The climate-controlled wine cellar hummed softly. It smelled of oak and damp earth and money. Rows of cedar racks stretched from floor to ceiling, holding 3,000 bottles of the finest wine in the world. I walked to the section marked French Reds. I pulled out the 1982 Petrus. The label was thick, textured, elegant. Then I walked upstairs to the pantry. I opened the cabinet where the cooking wine was kept. I pulled out a bottle of $5 generic red blend from Target. The label was shiny and cheap. I held the 2 bottles side by side. The shapes were identical. The glass color was the same. The only difference was the label. And the cork. Robert had said I wouldn't know the difference if the label didn't tell me. My eyes fell on the drawer where we kept the steaming iron and the crafting supplies. I looked back at the $5,000 bottle. A question formed in my mind. A dangerous, expensive question. Would he? I carried both bottles to the kitchen island. I turned on the steamer. I was not just going to pack my clothes, I was going to pack a lesson. The garment steamer hissed on the kitchen island. It was a sound I usually associated with Robert's silk shirts, but today it was the soundtrack of my rebellion. I held the bottle of 1982 Chateau Petrus over the steam. My hand was steady. I had spent 20 years handling fragile things. Robert's ego, his business dinners, his family reputation. A piece of paper was nothing compared to that. The glue began to soften. The smell of warm, damp paper mixed with the expensive scent of the kitchen's jasmine diffuser. I picked up the razor blade. It was a standard utility blade from the garage, cold and sharp. I slid the edge under the corner of the label. "Please do not tear," I whispered. The paper lifted, slowly. It came off in one perfect piece, thick and cream-colored, bearing the red text that men like Robert worshipped. Grand Vin. I set it on a sheet of wax paper. Then I picked up the $5 bottle of red blend from Target. Removing the cheap label was harder. The glue was industrial stubborn. It fought me. I had to scrub the glass with Goo Gone until it squeaked, erasing every trace of its humble origins. Then came the transfer. I brushed a thin layer of adhesive onto the back of the Petrus label. My heart hammered against my ribs, a rhythmic thud that felt like a second clock ticking down. I aligned the corners. I smoothed it down. I stepped back. It was perfect. To the naked eye, the bottle on my counter was a $5,000 legend, but inside it was mass-produced grape juice with 14 grams of sugar per liter. My phone buzzed on the counter. The screen displayed a photo of Robert, a picture I had taken on our honeymoon in Napa. He looked younger then, less cruel. I answered on speaker. "Patricia." His voice was clipped. "I forgot to mention the alarm code. I had it changed this morning." "Of course you did," I said. I was staring at the fake bottle, mesmerized by the lie I had just constructed. "The new code is Ashley's birthday," Robert said. I paused. The cruelty was so casual it almost took my breath away. "I do not know Ashley's birthday," I said. "September 4th. And make sure you are gone by 6. The caterers are arriving early to set up the tasting room." The tasting room. A space I had designed with the architect. I had chosen the walnut paneling. I had selected the lighting to protect the vintages. "Who is coming?" I asked. "The board." Robert's voice swelled with pride. "And the investors from the Tokyo merger. This night determines the future of the firm, Patricia. Everything has to be flawless. That is why we are opening the 82. The 82. The bottle sitting on my counter. The bottle filled with $5 swill. The stakes had just multiplied. This was not just a dinner with a girlfriend. This was a $500 million business deal. If I did this, I could destroy his reputation professionally, not just socially. "Do not worry, Robert," I said, my voice smooth as velvet. "The 82 is ready for you." I hung up. I looked at the single bottle. It was not enough. If he was hosting a tasting, he would need a flight. He would need the 1990, the 95, the 2000. I looked at the case of Target wine I had bought. 11 bottles left. I went back to the basement. I moved quickly now. I was no longer a wife packing boxes. I was a surgeon. I brought up 4 more bottles, the stars of his collection, the ones he bragged about at the country club. The steamer hissed again. Steam, peel, scrub, glue. Steam, peel, scrub, glue. I worked for 2 hours. The kitchen began to look like an art forgery workshop. There was one problem left: the corks. Robert was a snob, but he was a lazy one. He never checked the cork stamp. He trusted the label. He trusted the price tag. But Ashley might look. I took the foil capsule from the cheap bottle. I used the back of a spoon to smooth out the wrinkles, molding it to look like the original foil. It was imperfect. A true expert would spot it in a second. But Robert was not a true expert. He was a man who bought things to feel important. I placed the 5 doctored bottles into the velvet-lined carrying case Robert used for special occasions. The real bottles, the actual $20,000 worth of wine, sat naked and unlabeled on the counter. I poured the first one down the sink. The rich, complex aroma of aged Bordeaux filled the kitchen. Notes of black truffle and dark cherry swirled down the drain. It hurt. It physically hurt to destroy something so beautiful. But then I thought about the divorce papers. I thought about the alarm code being his mistress's birthday. I poured the second bottle. Then the third. By the time I finished, the kitchen smelled like a vineyard and my hands were stained red. I placed the Target bottles, now wearing their royal robes, into the temperature-controlled display case in the dining room. I positioned the 1982 right in the center, under the halogen spotlight. It gleamed. A Trojan horse made of glass. I packed my single suitcase. I left the keys on the counter. I walked out the front door at 5:55. The air outside was crisp. I got into my car and drove to the Motel 6 on the highway. I had $20 in my checking account and a room that smelled like stale cigarettes. But as I lay on the lumpy mattress checking my watch, I did not feel poor. I felt like I was waiting for the curtain to rise on the greatest show of my life. I pulled out my phone. I had one more message to send. James Wilson, the lawyer, had been invited to the party. He had always been kind to me in his passive way. I typed a text. James, make sure you check the vintage tonight. Robert says it is a surprise. I hit send. Now I just had to wait for the explosion. My phone lit up on the scarred nightstand of the Motel 6. It was 7:30. The photo on the screen showed a Baccarat crystal decanter filled with dark red liquid. The caption read, "Real elegance. Ashley loves it." I stared at the image. Robert was bragging to me about drinking $5 supermarket wine that he thought was a $5,000 vintage. He was bragging about serving it to the woman who replaced me. I should have felt satisfied. I should have turned off my phone and ordered a pizza and waited for the inevitable lawsuit. But then a second text came through. Where is the leather logbook? I need the tasting notes for the 82. I sat up. The bed springs creaked beneath me. Of course he needed the notes. Robert liked owning wine, but he did not understand it. He could not tell you about the weather patterns in Bordeaux in 1982. He could not describe the soil composition or the aging process. For 20 years I had been his brain. I wrote the scripts that made him sound sophisticated at dinner parties. I did the research that impressed his clients. He wanted to steal my collection, give it to his mistress, and then demand I provide the script for them to enjoy it. The audacity felt like a physical slap. I stood up and walked to the mirror. The fluorescent light was unflattering, showing the lines of exhaustion around my eyes. I am not doing this, I said to the empty room. I was not going to send him a text so he could shine while I hid in a cheap motel. I typed a reply. It is in the library. Top shelf. Then I typed a second message to James Wilson. Is he pouring yet? The response from James came back immediately. 3 dots dancing. Then, he is decanting now. The Tokyo investors are waiting. He is making a big speech about heritage. Patricia, he is drunk on power. I looked at my suitcase. My black dress, the one I wore to funerals and board meetings, was still folded on top. I had legal possession of the house until midnight. The paper Robert made me sign said I had 24 hours to remove my personal effects. Well, I had one more personal effect to remove, my dignity. I changed quickly. I put on the dress. I applied my lipstick like war paint. I checked out of the motel. The night clerk looked at me with curiosity, but I did not stop. I drove back to the estate. The night was dark and the road was familiar. Every turn was a memory. The corner where we taught our daughter to drive, the hill where we watched fireworks. I arrived at the gate at 8:15. I punched in the code, 0904. Ashley's birthday. The iron gate swung open smoothly. The driveway was full. I recognized the cars. A silver Bentley belonging to the CEO of the investment firm, a black Mercedes Maybach for the Tokyo delegation, James's sensible Lexus, and right in the front a bright red Porsche convertible. Ashley. I parked my 10-year-old sedan behind the Porsche. The contrast was poetic. I walked up the stone path to the front door, but I did not go in. Not yet. I walked around the side of the house to the terrace. The floor-to-ceiling windows of the dining room offered a perfect view of the stage. I stood in the shadows of the rose bushes I had planted. The dining room was glowing with candlelight. The table was set with the gold-rimmed china. Robert stood at the head of the table. He looked flushed, excited. He was holding the decanter of Target wine like it was the Holy Grail. Ashley sat to his right. She was young, beautiful, and looked bored. She was checking her phone under the table. The investors sat in stiff silence waiting. I watched Robert gesture with his free hand. I could almost hear his voice through the glass, the booming baritone he used when he was selling something. He picked up the tasting journal. My journal. He adjusted his glasses and began to read. He was reciting my words. He was stealing my intellect to sell my wine to his clients. I saw James Wilson sitting at the far end of the table. He looked pale. He kept glancing at his watch. Robert poured a small amount into his own glass. The taster's pour. He swirled it violently. He held it up to the light. He closed his eyes and inhaled deeply, acting out a pantomime of ecstasy. He was smelling commercially added coloring and oak chips, and he looked like he was in heaven. Then he poured for the Tokyo investor. Then for the CEO. Then for Ashley. He raised his glass. I saw his lips move. To new beginnings. They all raised their glasses. The moment hung in the air, suspended and fragile as glass. I stepped out of the shadows. I walked to the French doors. I placed my hand on the handle. It was unlocked. Robert tilted the glass to his lips. I pushed the door open. The cold night air rushed into the warm room, carrying the scent of rain and impending disaster. Robert lowered his glass. His eyes met mine. "Patricia," he said. The word was a choke. I stepped into the light. "I believe you are drinking my toast," I said. Robert lowered his glass slowly. The candlelight reflected off the sweat beading on his forehead. "You are trespassing," he said. His voice was low, dangerous. I walked further into the room. My heels clicked against the hardwood floor, a sharp staccato rhythm that cut through the silence. "I still have possession until midnight," I said. I checked my watch. "I have 3 hours." Ashley looked from me to Robert. Her eyes were wide. She looked like a child who had walked into a lecture hall by mistake. Robert stood up. He smoothed his tie. He turned to the investors with a tight, practiced smile. "Gentlemen, my apologies. This is my ex-wife. She is evidently having trouble accepting the transition." He looked at me with pure venom. "Patricia, you are embarrassing yourself. We are in the middle of a serious tasting. This is a 1982 Petrus. It requires reverence." He lifted the glass again, swirling the dark liquid. "It requires a palate," I said softly. Robert laughed. A short bark of a sound. "And you have one. You drink coffee from a gas station. Please leave before I call security." He took a sip. He closed his eyes. He hummed with pleasure. "Magnificent," he announced to the table. "You can taste the iron in the soil, the complexity of the age. It opens up like a symphony." He looked at the Tokyo investors. "Please, drink. It is a crime to let it breathe too long." The CEO hesitated, then took a sip. He nodded politely. Robert turned to me, emboldened by their compliance. "See, Patricia, this is what class tastes like. It tastes like history. It tastes like success, something you would know nothing about." I stood at the head of the table opposite him. I rested my hands on the back of an empty chair. "It tastes like 14 grams of residual sugar per liter," I said. Robert froze. "It tastes like wood chips added for flavor because the grapes were harvested too early in the Central Valley. It tastes like mass production." "What are you talking about?" Robert snapped. "You are drunk." I looked at the bottle sitting in the center of the table. The label was perfect. My handiwork was flawless. "But the devil is in the details, Robert. You always forget the details." I turned to the CEO. "Sir, may I ask you to examine the cork?" Robert slammed his hand on the table. "Enough." James Wilson, the lawyer, reached out. His hand was shaking slightly. He picked up the cork from the silver tray where Robert had carelessly discarded it. Robert never checked the corks. He assumed the label was the truth. James looked at the cork. He squinted. "Robert," James said. His voice was a whisper. "What?" Robert demanded. "This cork is synthetic," James said. The room went dead silent. A 1982 Petrus does not have a synthetic cork. James looked up, his face pale. "It says California Table Blend on the side." Robert snatched the cork from James. He stared at it. He looked at the bottle. He looked at the glass in his hand. The glass he had just described as a symphony. The glass he had just praised for its soil content and history. "No," he stammered. "This is a mistake. The caterers—" I stepped forward. "The caterers did not touch the wine cellar, Robert. You forbade them. Remember." I pointed to the glass in Ashley's hand. "You just served your $500 million investors a $5 bottle of red blend from Target, and you could not tell the difference." I watched the realization hit him. It was not just embarrassment. It was professional suicide. He had built his entire brand on sophistication, on knowing the best, on being an expert, and he had just proven in front of the men who held his future that he was a fraud who bought labels, not quality. The CEO of the Tokyo firm set his glass down. The sound was deafening in the quiet room. He took a white napkin and wiped his mouth. "Mr. Johnson," the CEO said, his voice was very cold, "if your due diligence regarding this merger is as thorough as your wine selection, we have a serious problem." Robert turned red. "Listen, she tampered with it. She is crazy." The CEO stood up. "Perhaps. But you drank it. You praised it. You sold it to us as gold." He looked at me. He nodded a small gesture of respect. "Madam." He signaled to his team. They stood up in unison. "Wait!" Robert pleaded. He ran around the table. "We can open another bottle. I have a 95. I leaned in close to him. "The 95 is $2 Chuck," I said. His eyes bulged. "And the 2000. That is grape juice and vodka." I picked up the bottle of fake Petrus. I held it out to him. "You wanted the wine collection, Robert. You fought for it. You insulted me for it." I placed the bottle firmly in his chest. He grabbed it reflexively. "It is all yours. Every single drop." I turned to Ashley. She was staring at Robert with a look of pure disgust. The spell was broken. She saw him now. Not the powerful tycoon, but a desperate man holding a bottle of cheap swill. "Nice lipstick," I told her. I walked to the French doors. Robert was shouting something behind me, but his voice sounded thin, weak. James Wilson was already packing his briefcase. I stepped out into the night air. It was cold. It was dark, but it tasted like champagne. 3 weeks later, the sunlight hit my new kitchen table in a way it never did at the estate. The estate had UV-coated windows to protect the antiques. My new apartment in the city had open windows that let in the smell of rain and fresh roasted coffee from the shop downstairs. I was unpacking the last box when the buzzer rang. It was James Wilson. He looked different without his tie, less like a corporate shark and more like a man who had finally exhaled. He carried a manila envelope in one hand and a bottle of wine in the other. "Patricia," he said, stepping inside. "It smells like actual food in here. I was baking rosemary bread. Simple. Inexpensive. Real." I gestured for him to sit. He placed the envelope on the table. "The final settlement," James said. I looked at the envelope. I did not open it. "How is he?" I asked. James sighed. He sat down and ran a hand through his thinning hair. "It is a bloodbath, Patricia. The Tokyo investors didn't just pull out of the merger. They filed a formal complaint with the SEC about misrepresentation of assets. They claimed if the CEO could not verify a $5 bottle of wine, how could he verify a $500 million asset portfolio? I poured 2 cups of coffee. Black. The board voted him out on Thursday. James continued. They bought out his shares for pennies on the dollar. The firm is rebranding. They want nothing to do with the Johnson name. "And the house?" I asked. "On the market. He cannot afford the mortgage without the CEO's salary. He is living in the guest cottage while the stagers prep the main house." I took a sip of coffee. The image of Robert, the king of the castle, reduced to living in the guest house of his own estate, felt like a Greek tragedy. "And Ashley," James laughed. Ashley left the night of the tasting. She took the Porsche, which apparently was leased in the company name, so that is another lawsuit he is dealing with. She posted a TikTok yesterday about toxic men who fake their wealth. It has 2 million views. I felt a strange sense of pity. Not enough to undo what I did, but enough to realize that hatred was too heavy a burden to carry into my new life. Robert had spent his life curating a label. He wanted the perfect wife, the perfect house, the perfect wine collection, but he never cared about what was inside the bottle. He never cared about the substance. When I exposed the bottle, I exposed him. James pushed the wine bottle he had brought toward me. "I brought this," he said. I checked the cork myself. I looked at the label. It was an Oregon Pinot Noir. $30. Not famous. Not prestigious. But I knew the winemaker. She was a woman who worked the soil herself, who refused to use additives, who cared about the truth of the grape. I picked up my old corkscrew. The handle was worn, wood-shaped to my hand. I cut the foil. I drove the worm into the cork. I pulled. The pop was soft, a gentle exhale. I poured 2 glasses. The wine was a translucent ruby color. I swirled it. I did not close my eyes. I did not make a speech. I just smelled it. It smelled like damp earth and cherries. It smelled like hard work. I took a sip. It was bright and acidic and alive. James raised his glass. To new beginnings. I clinked my glass against his. To knowing the difference. I looked around my apartment. It was 1/10 the size of the estate. I did not have a climate-controlled cellar. I did not have a board of directors to impress. But everything in this room was mine. Every book on the shelf, every scar on the table, every dollar in my bank account. I opened the envelope James had brought. The check was for $400,000, my share of the liquid assets. It was not millions. But it was enough to start the wine consulting business I had been dreaming of for 10 years. A business that would focus on female winemakers, on underrated regions, on the truth in the bottle. I am not Mrs. Robert Johnson anymore. I am Patricia Green. I am not the curator of someone else's life. I am the architect of my own. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. The rain had stopped. The clouds were breaking. Robert was alone in a mansion filled with fake wine and real regrets. I was here drinking a $30 bottle that tasted like victory. I took another sip. It was the best glass of wine I had ever had. Sometimes you have to empty the bottle to see what is really at the bottom, and sometimes you have to break the bottle to save yourself. If you have ever been underestimated, if you have ever had someone look at your label and ignore your substance, I want to hear your story in the comments. And if you want more stories about women who refuse to be just a decoration, hit subscribe. I will be here with a glass of good, honest wine waiting for you. See you next time.